here, and this is More Than a Love Interest, the show where we talk about the arcs of female characters in film. Today we are talking about Miss Swann.
How many times must I ask you to call me Elizabeth?
Okay, Elizabeth in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, The Curse of the Black Pearl. Our discussion is going to have 3 parts. First, a synopsis of the plot to give context to her role in the movie, then an analysis of how her arc fits the heroine's journey, and finally a discussion about how these are affected by her costumes and framing. If you are wondering who is keeping the Pirates franchise afloat, it's me. You can keep your Star Wars and your Harry Potters and your Marvel movies, which we will talk about, but Pirates is my favorite series. So I can, and have, recited this entire movie from memory, but I will be happy to give you a brief rundown of the plot. Spoilers! Now Elizabeth has the plot function of damsel in distress, but how much impact is she allowed to have? How much agency? First, let's list the ways in which Elizabeth is in a tropey damsel in distress role. Fainting when Norrington proposes, kidnapped by pirates, forced to wear the red dress, forced to dine with Barbossa, surrounded by zombie pirates, forced to go into the treasure cave, sacrificed, sort of, rescued by Will, marooned, rescued by Norrington and her father, locked up for her own safety. That is a lot, but let's look at how much she is allowed to react to those events. Her fainting does start off the plot and will lead to her escape from this societal role, something she was clearly chafing against. She gets kidnapped because she uses her knowledge about pirates to go parlay, so is actively involved in that process instead of being a passive damsel. The red dress will come back to in the third part of this show. When she is dining with Barbossa, she does attack him and try to escape, so is definitely fighting that damsel role. She is passive during the cave scene, but then is very actively involved in their escape attempt from the Black Pearl. She and Anna Maria help the movie pass the Bechdel test by discussing tactics. She is also the reason she and Jack get rescued from being marooned, as she actively summons the Navy to find her. When she is locked up during the climactic battle, she escapes and goes to get help from Jack's crew. When they refuse her, she goes to save Will herself. She holds her own in fighting alongside him, improvising a fighting style that is, effective. In the final scene, she reappropriates her fainting spell from the beginning to help with Will's plan to save Jack from the gallows. She then joins him in standing up for the pirate, which de-escalates the situation. Finally, she jilts Norrington and makes it clear to everyone that her preference is Will, regardless of the societal expectations. Overall, she is allowed to impact the plot just about as often as it impacts her, which is really ideal. As far as the main plot goes, Elizabeth plays a major part. She may be in the damsel role frequently, but she works to rescue herself and Will just as often as she is rescued. Her role is not being a plot device who drives the men around her to act, but to have her own agency to drive the plot herself. She and Will are the deuterogonists of the film, sharing the protagonist role. Now, to define her as a deuteragonist, she would need to go through her own character arc that isn't based entirely on Will. So let's talk about how fleshed out her arc really is. Alright, let's talk about Elizabeth's character arc, for which we are going to use Maureen Murdock's Heroine's Journey. It outlines the trials and tribulations that a character goes on in order to come of age. The heroine's journey begins with rejecting the feminine and ends with accepting and integrating the feminine with the masculine. As always, we are going to be discussing masculine and feminine in an archetypal sense. There's a link below if you are interested in learning more about the journey, but let's get started. The first step of the heroine's journey is the separation from the feminine. This can take multiple forms, usually being a woman separating from her mother to become an adult. It can also be from societal expectations, as it is for Elizabeth. Elizabeth's mother is never mentioned in any way, so obviously this separation is not what jumpstarts her journey, though one could argue that her separation is from her father instead. What starts Elizabeth's journey is also what kicks off the plot, when Elizabeth falls into the sea. Before this, Elizabeth was interested in pirates as a child, but it is clear that her father has impressed upon her the proper ways to behave, as we see when he chides her for still being in bed and for talking to Will about her dream. We can reasonably assume that talk of piracy, which he reprimanded her for as a child, was also banned, especially given the dusty and unused state of the medallion in her drawer. So she has been at least trying to be a proper lady in the interceding years, dressing the part and becoming a fine woman worthy of Commodore Norrington's interest. On the day we meet her as an adult, she has been reminded of pirates, her old interest, and this causes her to start to rebel against propriety. She is shown fidgeting with her dress and being uncomfortable during the ceremony. When Norrington proposes, she falls off a cliff to escape. Now, obviously, there are in-universe explanations. It's a hot day, the dress is heavy, the corset is too tight, but two of these are distinctly feminine things that upset our heroine, and being proposed to is just another societal expectation that is smothering her. So she falls right out of that role and into the sea. Her medallion calls for pirates, and she is going to get the escape from society's rules that she always wanted. The second step of the journey is a reliance on the masculine and gathering of allies. The heroine has stepped away from femininity in some way and is trying to find her place in the world without it. Elizabeth has separated from the feminine by being literally divested of her fancy dress and encountering her first pirate in close quarters. It does not go exactly how she expects, and she is obviously displeased to be used as a hostage for Captain Jack Sparrow to escape. However, it is what she has come to expect from pirates, even if he is not acting as an ally here, and it no doubt cements in her mind his reputation. For Elizabeth's journey in this film, the feminine is the societal rules by which she feels constrained, and the masculine is the freedom of piracy, which has its own set of rules. When the pirates come to take her, she relies on what she knows about piracy to save herself, including self-defense tactics and invoking the code, things she certainly didn't learn as a proper lady. So while Barbossa and his crew are no allies of hers, the piratical worldview is, and she comes to rely on it for most of the film. The third step is the road of trials, ogres, and dragons, where the heroine faces off against external forces. For Elizabeth, Barbossa's ghostly crew is obviously the external foe. She negotiates for them to stop attacking Port Royal, but is still taken captive. Her pirate tactics only go so far in this situation because Barbossa is clearly more adept at them than she is. So her road of trials includes her failed negotiations, being a captive, her dinner with Barbossa, her plan to escape failing, and, of course, the crew of zombie pirates she is going to be sacrificed for. The fourth step is the illusion of success, where the external threat has been neutralized in some way, but the internal one has not. Elizabeth's external threat, Barbossa's crew, is essentially neutralized as soon as she reveals she is not Bootstrap Bill Turner's daughter. Obviously, things would not end well for her if she were to remain there, but the pirates will no longer be hunting her. More success is found when Will is suddenly there to rescue her and take her away from the pirates. 2, as she is dismayed to find more pirates. Still, they escape the island and things are looking up. The fifth step is a low point of spiritual aridity for the heroine as she realizes her allies have failed her and she has foolishly cut off the feminine aspects of herself. In this case, being the father and Royal Navy out in search for her, who would certainly be helpful in this situation. Will and Elizabeth have a heart-to-heart about what brought them to this point. Elizabeth's journey is not over, though the pirates have no further interest in her. Instead, they are going to hunt Will, which forces her to address her internal conflict. This conflict is hinted at earlier when talking to her maid. When her maid expresses sympathy for her difficult day, Elizabeth misconstrues what might have been stressful by bringing up the marriage proposal. She says she expected it, though felt unprepared. Being threatened by a pirate was apparently something she was prepared for, while dealing with the societal expectation of marriage to Norrington was not. The maid pushes her by suggesting that Will Turner is a fine prospect as well, and she reprimands the maid for saying something she was unwilling to admit to herself. Will represents a freedom from some of the feminine roles she felt constrained by, but not so dangerous and unpredictable as unfettered piracy. She has not come to terms with it yet, but she is realizing that she could not be herself if she married Norrington, a rule-abiding man who voraciously chases pirates, and she loves her father too much to become a pirate completely, at least as far as this movie goes. So she will have to integrate the masculine and feminine sides of herself, accepting both her role as a lady and getting the treasure she has been seeking. The booty, if you will. Thus, her heart-to-heart with Will brings her internal conflict back into focus. She has been taken from one oppressive society to another, and in this world of pirates, she has none of the privilege afforded to her that she had before. This marks the beginning of her descent as she learns of Will's past and realizes both her feelings for him and that he is in grave danger. Their escape won't be enough because the pirates will still hunt for him, no matter where they go. When the Black Pearl catches up to them, it is apparent that her attempts at piracy were not effective. They are still caught, and neither Will nor Jack's negotiations help. Will is going to be killed, and she is powerless to stop it, putting her at her lowest point. The next step, the descent, is the crisis a heroine faces as she realizes that all of her masculine strategies have failed. Elizabeth experiences this both during the unsuccessful flight from the Black Pearl and on the island where she and Jack are marooned. Her faith in his piratical abilities is lost when he reveals he only waited to be rescued the last time he was marooned. She does not want to go back to waiting to be rescued and is dismayed to find that even such a famous pirate cannot help her. This step tends to be fairly short in visual media, and Elizabeth appears to bounce back right away. She is disappointed, but quickly develops a plan to use her feminine wiles on Jack to get him drunk. Whether she learned this from her pirate studies or from her experience as a lady is unclear, but she certainly is intending to return to her feminine role. This brings us to the seventh step, where the heroine yearns to reconnect to the feminine. Elizabeth's pirate allies have failed her, both her tactics and the people themselves. She has given up on them as a tool to help her save Will, and she urgently longs to return to her place of privilege as the governor's daughter. She burns half the island to bring the Royal Navy, her father, and Commodore Norrington to her aid. She consents to marry Norrington, taking up the role she was arguably raised to have, in order to save Will, the only thing that matters. So she entreats the Royal Navy to go attack the pirates as a way to get what she really wants, and is willing to accept the consequences of her choice. Even if it includes becoming the proper wife of a British officer, she accepts it as a means to save Will. The eighth step is healing the mother-daughter split, or the initial separation from the feminine. As I've said, she does this by returning to her father and to Commodore Norrington, the characters she is with when we meet her as a child. She is accepting her role as the governor's daughter, who must marry well and behave appropriately. However, she has not really healed the split at this point in the story, so her journey jumps around a bit at the end. While I believe she is willing to marry Norrington to serve her needs to rescue Will, she has certainly not accepted the side of herself as being necessary. Being part of society is not something she ever really wanted, and it is difficult to say that she truly heals the split here. Arguably, she has healed the internal split by realizing she needs both the piratical and civilized tactics to save Will. This is not a perfect fit, however, since the Navy proves largely unsuccessful, calling into doubt those civilized tactics, and her attempt to get Jack's crew marks her further dependence on piracy, which is then disappointed as they keep to the code by leaving Jack behind. So healing this split for Elizabeth is more learning to depend on herself and her abilities, to use both what she has learned from pirates and what she can do as the daughter of the governor. The final battle is more about Will and Jack than it is about Elizabeth. I would say that the real next step on Elizabeth's journey is when she is attending Jack's hanging. It's unclear how long it has been since they returned to Port Royal, but certainly a few days. She is dressed up again, but more as a woman than as a child. This dress is likely her choice instead of her father's, and she seems much more comfortable in it. Will confesses his love for her, and she sees that he has some piratical plan in place. She uses what started all this, her fainting, to distract Norrington and her father. Then she uses her status to defend Will and Jack, which is when she has accepted this part of herself. So this is clearly how she has healed her separation from the feminine. The next step is making peace with the masculine. The original feminine has been accepted, and, though the heroine may have been disappointed by her masculine allies, she makes peace with them anyway. For Elizabeth, she makes peace with Jack by freeing him. More importantly, she makes peace internally with piracy by deciding to do what she can to help Will in the rescue attempt, and then standing by him when he gets caught. Rather than rejecting the masculine to return to the feminine, she is integrating both. The final step. Elizabeth, standing next to Will on the cliff where her journey started, makes for a poetic end to her arc. She was chafing against societal expectations before literally descending to confront her internal conflict. She tried out piracy and found both it and pirates themselves could disappoint her, and it was not the ideal lifestyle she dreamed of. Still, she took Jack's ideas about freedom to heart and used what she learned from her masculine allies to reject society's more stringent rules. And now she integrates the masculine, piracy, and feminine, society, to seek a future with Will. Her journey, at least for now, is complete. Overall, Elizabeth has an excellent arc, going through all the steps of the heroine's journey. She's a fully realized character whose development is central to the plot. Her wants versus needs dichotomy is addressed, and she is allowed to have both external and internal conflicts that are tackled and then thoroughly resolved by the end of the film. This is an exemplary example of how to write a female character. Finally, let's talk about costumes and frame. Film is a visual medium, so how a character is represented visually can undermine or enhance her character arc. If she is filmed like a sexy lamp, it's going to be difficult for the audience to see her as a person, while costumes that make sense in-universe convey a more fleshed-out character. I have a lot to say about Elizabeth's costumes, it turns out. There's a link below to my more substantial thoughts, but here are a few things to note. First, let us remember Elizabeth's ingenue status in the genre objectively. She is a maiden of wealth who is kidnapped in her nightgown by pirates who intend to use her for their own ends. She is the love interest of Will, whose pirate past has come back to haunt him. She is also in a love triangle with Will, a blacksmith from a lower class, and Norrington, an officer in the Navy. All of these facts point to a very particular type of female character, and Elizabeth's costume choices make a point of rejecting that idea. Though she spends a lot of time in a nightgown or a shift, neither of these are flowy or see-through. She wears a dressing gown when anyone else is around, and it has a pattern on it instead of being more ingenue white. The shift is a sturdy fabric whose silhouette is almost modern, suggesting an empowered woman instead of a damsel. Neither of these choices emphasize her vulnerability, and they very easily could have. Similarly, the corset she wears develops her character and kicks off the plot because of her reaction to it, rather than being lingerie for us to look at. Though corsets are a necessary structural garment for the kinds of dresses she wears, and really should be something she would have been wearing most of her life, the presence of one here still goes against genre conventions. Next, she wears two fancy gowns in the movie, both at the fort. The first one her father chose, and that is plain from seeing them. It is more layered, fancier, more feminine, but also more modest. The second one may not have been her choice, but it does emphasize her character arc. In the first one, she was smothered and uncomfortable, wearing a dress her father chose to go be proposed to by a man her father chose. At the end of the movie, in the same spot, she is wearing a more comfortable dress and telling her father what her choice is. It's a great parallel. Finally, and this is really important for this section, let's talk about the dress the pirates have her wear. Unlike anything else she wears in this movie, it is a dark color, and specifically it is red and black. Evil colors. The dress is fancy, but one she can put on and take off without help, unlike what she wears willingly. Let's just dance past the implications because this is a kids' movie. There are 2 points I want to make about this dress. First, this movie is about Elizabeth growing up into a fine woman, and this dress emphasizes her budding sexuality. She is viewed as more of a child in her life on Port Royal before this adventure, and being made aware of her capabilities as a woman, of her potentially useful feminine wiles, is an important part of her arc. It's how she tricks Jack on the island when they're marooned, and arguably how she gets the Royal Navy to go save Will. This is important because a woman having sexual agency in a film, especially a mainstream one, is fairly rare. What I mean by that is this. Though she is technically in a love triangle, do you ever really think of it that way? No, because her preferences are clear from the beginning, from the way she talks to Will versus how she talks to Norrington, and the movie makes it clear that her preferences are going to matter. Now, we know Will better than Norrington, of course, so we are rooting for him to get the girl, but we meet Elizabeth first, and we get to know her better, so the fact that they are technically in a love triangle is not at all part of the dramatic storyline, because we know Elizabeth is going to get what she wants. Let's move on to the second thing about that dress. The red dress is exactly why I have this segment, because this is a perfect example of what filmmakers should do instead of what they usually do. This is the outfit that a young woman is put in when she is alone, kidnapped on a ship full of pirates. I should not need to spell out for you what the implications of that are. And while we as the audience are worried about her because of the fact that they are ghost pirates, we are at least aware of other, more ordinary but no less horrifying, dangers to her in this situation. But the dress she is wearing does not add to that fear, and it easily could have. What I'm saying is, this dress is certainly objectifying for her in-universe. The pirates are leering at her, they're making suggestive noises when she's wearing it. Barbossa talks about it still being warm when she takes it off. But the filmmakers did not choose to include the audience in that objectification of her. We do not have camera angles that linger or a costume that shows a lot of skin. Elizabeth is allowed to be in a situation where her agency has been taken from her without the audience being complicit in removing that agency. She is still our protagonist, and she is presented as a person first and a woman in peril second. I'm just saying that they didn't need to put her in some kind of gold bikini to get the point across. So overall, the costumes and framing really add to her character arc. They create parallels to compare where she is at the beginning to where she is at the end, as well as going against established genre conventions to convey how Elizabeth herself will go against conventions. It's a masterclass in how costumes can enhance a character and her agency. Alright, here are my final thoughts about Elizabeth. I adore these movies, and her characterization is a big part of that. In a genre where fainting ingenues are plentiful, it's refreshing to see her having agency through the entire film. There are a lot of tropes from the genre used here, but they tend to be subverted at least as often as they are followed. Elizabeth could easily have been a one-note character used to drive the plot, especially given the amount of time she spends getting rescued. But she gets to rescue Will and Jack right back, and make choices that impact how the final ending works out for the best for everyone. So is Elizabeth more than a love interest? Most definitely. There is a lot of care shown for Elizabeth's character arc, and she is certainly as much a main character as Will is. She is allowed to have her own wants and needs, and the plot helps her realize which is which. Now, since women tend to have more complete character arcs in books than in mainstream movies, I'd like to leave you with a book recommendation. I would love to hear yours in the comments, especially if they have to do with pirates. If you enjoy Elizabeth's journey in this movie, I would suggest you check out the aptly named Pirates by Celia Rees. It has a wealthy female protagonist dealing with pirates and malevolent forces on the high seas. It's a bit darker than Pirates of the Caribbean, however, so if you just want a charming pirate story, consider Captain Blood by Raphael Sabatini. Thank you for listening to me talk about my favorite franchise. We will talk more about Elizabeth in the future, but please join me next time on More Than a Love Interest as we talk about...
I am Diana of Themyscira, daughter of Hippolyta, Queen of the Amazons.
Please like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, all the things so you don't miss it. See you then.